Good evening, everyone. Not sure if anyone can hear me. I have very limited view options. This is Counselor Mejia.
This is Kerry. I can hear you loud and clear. Ready to roll when you are.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Kerry. I'm just curious about what I see here on the screen. Is there's a reason why I don't see everybody? I just want to make
Yes.
sure.
Once you gavel at the start, I'll clear this out and you'll have all the videos of folks and we'll get it going.
Okay, great. I just want to see who's here. I see my sisters in the house. That's what I'm talking about.
Hello, Madam Chair, I am here.
That's right. I see my sister. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, great. Oh, I can't hear her. Maybe something's wrong with my.
Nope, that was me. I'm ready whenever you guys are ready. So whenever you're ready to gavel, I'm here.
Okay, great. Okay. I'm having a little bit of internet issues, and so if I disappear into the internet abyss, I'm going to ask Counselor Janie to please step in and facilitate. So if someone from my team could send over to Counselor Janie the just the order of the speakers, just so that she has it, just in case, God forbid, anything happens and I am not able to facilitate. All right, so I need to gavel us in. I'm going to use my phone to do so. Kerry, whenever you're ready, I'm ready to go. Okay. It seems like we are live and ready to start. Good evening, everyone. My name is Counselor. Let me gavel in. I'm gaveling us in, and I'm calling this hearing to an order. For the record, my name is Julia Mejia. I'm an at-large city councilor. I'm the chair of the Boston Council's Committee on Small Business and Workforce Development. And I'm also one of the co-sponsors of this hearing order, and I'm joined by my co-sponsor and sister in service, Council President Kim Janey of District 7. I'm also joined by my colleagues in the order of arrival, Councilor Ed Flynn from District 2, Councilor Ricardo Arroyo from District 5. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom in accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibility while adhering to public health accommodations, ensuring public access through adequate alternative means. I have to put my glasses on, y'all. This public hearing may be watched. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/citycouncil-tv. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964. We will also take public testimony at the end of the hearing. If you are interested in testifying, please email michelle.a.goldberg@boston.gov for the link and follow along on the live stream so you know when it's your turn to speak. We will ask that you please state your name and affiliation, residency, and limit your comments to 2 minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. Today's hearing is on docket 0888, order for a hearing concerning residents and neighborhoods most affected by student debt post-pandemic. Our expected speakers today include Commissioner Carlos Santiago of the Department of Higher Education of Massachusetts, Marcelo Suarez Orcasio, Chancellor of UMass Boston, bienvenido. Dr. Valerie Robinson, President of the Roxbury Community College, Claudio Martinez, Executive Director of Zero Debt Massachusetts, Kate Welbeck of the Student Borrower Protection Center, and Vanessa Snow, Student Borrower and Community Organizer with SEIU 509. I will now recognize my co-sponsor for opening statements before turning it over to my colleagues. Councilor Janey, you now have the floor. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry. I was on mute, technology, here we go. So thank you so much, Madam Chair. I want to start by thanking you for your leadership and your partnership on this issue. So I want to thank my sister in service, Councilor Mejia. Examining college debt is more than looking to just erase numbers. This is a crisis. The student debt crisis is an economic and racial justice issue, and we must address it. Student debt perpetuates and widens the enormous wealth gap that we see in the city of Boston and throughout our country. We've got to make sure, particularly as this pandemic continues, that families that have economic hardships and are trying to figure out their way out of this financial situation, we cannot continue to burden them with student debt. We have young people who are graduating from college with enormous debt, unable to get a job that will allow them to pay off that debt, unable to start a family, to buy a home, things that, the American dream is at risk here. And it's because student debt has become such an anchor weighing families down. And this is particularly true for Black and Brown students, first generation students. We're looking at, for the first time in a long time, where the next generation coming up will not be afforded the same opportunities and more opportunities than their parents. So we've got to tackle this here in our city. This is not something, just to be clear, the city council doesn't have governance over student debt, but we do have a role to play in terms of elevating this issue and advocating for the resources needed so that our families throughout the city of Boston and throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are not saddled, particularly Black and Brown families and first-gen college students. I want to thank folks who have been on the front lines working on this issue, Zero Debt Massachusetts, for their tireless advocacy. There are a lot of student groups who have been doing a lot of great work here. We've got an amazing panel. I want to thank everyone on this panel and want to thank my colleagues and everyone who is watching for their thoughtful questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on. I also wanted to acknowledge that we've also been joined by Councilor Campbell of District 4. I am going to share some opening remarks, and then I would love to, by a show of blue hands, if my colleagues are interested in what opening remarks, just let me know by a show of blue hands. So for me, this issue is deeply personal and professional, and I'm really excited to be working alongside Councilor President Kim Janey on this issue as someone who I know has been working in the education space. For a long time, she shares my passion specifically as it relates to our English language learners. I came to this country with a huge interrupted education, learned how to speak English. And let me just tell you that I almost was 20 by the time I graduated high school and got to college. And when I got there, I was not prepared to succeed. But because I have an award-winning personality, I became really good friends with the bursar, and she allowed me to retake some courses again without creating financial debt. But what I do know is that a lot of our first-generation students end up in their first year of college unprepared because we did not do our due diligence through the K through 12 space to ensure that they were prepared for college. And so they struggle and oftentimes end up having to drop out with a massive debt. And even when we do graduate, we come back and we struggle to find jobs that will help us pay off our debt. So this is an issue that when it comes to poverty, if we're really serious about alleviating poverty, then we have to do something around this particular issue. I totally went off script, so let me just go back here. As the first person in my family to graduate high school and college, I felt that the opportunities that were made available to me because of my education, but I also felt that the weight of student debt were on my shoulders. This is not just a financial issue, it's an issue of mental health as well. Money problems are triggering. It's hard enough to try and keep your head above water in the city without the doom and gloom of the student debt. I hope this hearing will be informative and solution oriented. I think that while we each know individually the burden of student debt, We have a lot of work to do to build upon our collective knowledge and collective action. I look forward to this hearing. And I'll turn over the conversation over to the panel. I believe that I have some colleagues who have raised their blue hands. And I see one blue hand. And of course, it is my brother in service, Ricardo Arroyo, District 5 Councilor. You now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just want to say first a thank you to the advocates and also to the counselors for calling this hearing. Personally, myself, I have student loan debt. I was blessed when I went to undergrad through a blend of scholarship and family investment to walk out of undergrad with very little money owed, largely due to going to an in-state school. I now have close to $300,000 in student loan debt because I had the audacity to go to law school. And so when we talk about what this looks like in terms of a generational wealth gap, we exist in cultures and in a society that is very clear to all children, that education is a way forward for themselves and for their families. And when we have the history of that we do in this country of lack of opportunity for people of color, for slavery, for programs that have really shut out generational wealth, you create these gaps where our children, our most qualified children, our children who go to law school, hoping to break cycles of poverty, instead end up in a situation where instead of being able to cast down roots and sort of end a cycle of oppression that has occurred to them, where they can purchase a home and start a family and take care of those in their family who have been impacted by, the lack of opportunity and financial burdens in which comes with that. They are instead trying to make decisions, and I can speak for this personally, as to whether or not they'll ever own a home, whether or not they can have children on an income that is going to be so heavily dependent on taking a portion of that and paying back essentially the debt that you incurred to make an attempt to better yourself and your family. And in some cases, such as those who go into public interest, their communities. And so when we talk about this, there's a large amount of folks right now that are experiencing the pressures of paying back student loans. And I think one of the things to keep in mind as we center this conversation is those experiences were very different in the 70s and 60s and 80s. And the difference was that the state really shifted the burden on education costs to the students. And they essentially created a borrower system. Instead of subsidizing education as something that was good for our society, good for our communities, they put the burden of financing that education, not on the state, not on the city, but on those individual people. And when you have the kinds of generational wealth gaps that we have, when you have the kinds of racist policies that we've combated and still combat, those gaps are always going to impact people of color, women, and other oppressed peoples in ways that are far worse than the dominant culture. And so those are the things that I would like to see us kind of discuss, ways to move away from this current process and other ways in which the state and the city can really get involved, and federally, if there's ways we can pressure the feds to really move on these things. So thank you, everybody, for bringing this up. It's a very pertinent issue. It's a big issue. And I look forward to hearing from this panel on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Arroyo. I also see that Councilor Campbell also has her hand up. Councilor Campbell, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Councilors Mejia and Janie, for your leadership on this. There's going to be a panel discussion about this week. And this is such a critical issue. And thank you to all of the panelists for the work they do, not only in talking about it, but putting forth concrete ways in which we could assist folks who currently have debt, and then prevent, of course, communities from not becoming more indebted. Because like Councilor Arroyo said, it not only hinders an individual from going after what they dream of for themselves. I too left undergrad with no debt, then had the audacity to go to law school and left with debt. And so what does that say about our society, right? But then in addition to that, when you come out of law school and you want to use your law degree for community purpose or something bigger than you, it's really difficult to do that. Your choices are limited when you think about the amount of debt that you have and whether or not you should go into the private sector, to a law firm, et cetera. But it also hinders our community. in what the benefit they get from folks who have more freedom in their choices with respect to employment. And then of course, more freedom with respect to buying homes, et cetera. And we know it contributes to the racial wealth gap. And so I'm really excited about this conversation. Was just on the phone with someone about a hearing, Councilor Janey, Madam President, we're going to be hosting tomorrow with respect to a proposed ordinance on limiting an employer's ability to be able to use one's credit history in deciding whether or not to hire them or promote them, which is critically important. We know most folks who have debt is because of student loans, medical bills, or other things outside of their control, which of course now is this pandemic that is devastating our city and communities of color in particular. So this conversation is so timely, connects to the hearing tomorrow. So thank you ladies for your leadership and your partnership. I was on a meeting just now where someone said, you're wearing a sweatshirt. And I'm like, it's my Boston City Council sweatshirt. So shout out to Kerry. You've been getting a lot of love for the sweatshirts that you gave us. So thank you. Thank you to Central staff. And thank you ladies so much for your leadership on this.
Now, let me find out. I need a sweatshirt too, so I can represent. No, I'm really excited to have this hearing. And if anyone knows anything about me, I just prepared to, this is going to be a deep conversation, but in the interest of just making sure that people understand what's at stake, I'll push you a little bit. But the goal really is to bring our audience along on this journey. So if you say things that I don't understand, trust that I'm not gonna make my audience try to Google things out. So I'm gonna ask you to break it down in layman's terms, because I know we got some academia in the house, and I want you to know that people are paying attention, and I need you all to talk in ways that my people can understand it, okay? Just letting you know. So without further ado, I am going to, Councilor Janey has her hand raised.
Just thank you. And I'm so grateful that Councilor Campbell brought up the ordinance that we filed together on credit checks and how debt impacts people, not just, it's through the rest of their lives, every little decision that they make. And I just wanted to underscore, I know we're getting ready to jump into this amazing panel, but I wanted to underscore that for Black and Brown students, this is particularly a hardship, and first-gen students, particularly if they don't finish and get their degree. So oftentimes our students have the burden of, are they, where they need to be academically, they're doing all of what they need to do academically, and then if they don't, for whatever reason, graduate, but then are still burdened with debt, it's a double whammy because they don't have that degree that's going to afford them the job that's supposedly going to pay off the debt, but they still have the debt. And Black and Brown students are much more likely to be in that situation than their white and Asian counterparts. So this is a very timely conversation, and I just want to get into this panel. Thank you, Madam Chair, for indulging me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is, in the interest of just really making sure that we keep the conversation moving along, I am going to, I would like to ensure that we are able to get a real sense of who you are and the lens that you bring to the conversation. So we're asking everyone to keep their comments to 5 minutes. And then we'll open it up for questions, okay? I am going to move to Commissioner Santiago. You will now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Mejia and Chair Janey. Thank you for the invitation to join you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's good to see my colleagues, Chancellor Suarez Orozco and President Robertson. As Commissioner of Massachusetts Higher Education, I oversee the public institutions. There are 29 public institutions with primary focus on our 15 community colleges and 9 state universities. So I'm going to give you a few facts about Massachusetts higher education and financial aid in particular, because that's the cornerstone of what we use to assist students so that they don't have to take out loans. First off, how well a provider is Massachusetts compared to other states? Not the greatest. We're in the bottom third of states. We provide, 2 years ago was $95 million worth of financial aid. A third of that amount goes to private institutions. So 2/3 goes to public institutions. 2 years ago, that amount went up for the first time in 25 years to 105 million. And that was the first significant increase. The difference on how we used that additional $10 million was that we targeted the community colleges, and through a program called Mass Grant Plus, we basically covered unmet need at our community colleges. Now, how you define unmet need is important. We call it unmet need for the cost of instruction, tuition, fees, and a set amount for books and supplies. We subtract from that cost the Pell Grants or any other financial aid. This was targeted to the lowest income individuals in Massachusetts, particularly Pell Grant students. But if there was enough money to go beyond Pell Grant students, you factor in the family's contribution, and unmet need is the difference between the total cost and all of those various categories. And what Mass Grant did is that it paid 100% of those unmet costs. Now, you might ask, well, that's not the only cost. It's not just tuition, fees, and books and supplies. And you're right. There are a lot of things: childcare, transportation, housing. I can go on and on. So our definition of unmet need was somewhat limited, but it's what the funding allowed for. And we gave it to our community colleges. Last year's budget that the Board of Higher Education approved was to extend that unmet need completion to the state universities, and the third was to the UMass campuses. The budget that we put forward was a significant one. It did not get funded. But we do have enough, and we expect in this year's budget to cover unmet need in the community colleges. Just so you know, the public institutions are the most affordable of our institutions of higher education in Massachusetts. To give you a sense of how much students owe on average in the community colleges, between the time they start and finish, it's a 2-year degree, it's about $10,000. In the state universities and UMass, it's closer to $30,000. But it's important to remember that those amounts, that indebtedness of students, both the numbers of students that were indebted and the amount that they were indebted, grew dramatically between 2008, the Great Recession, and 2015. Since 2015, with programs like Mass Grant Plus and other financial aid targeted programs to low-income individuals, that number has started to go down. Both the amount of debt and the number of students that are taking out debt in our public institutions, not all institutions. This is not graduate school either. In our public institutions has gone down a little bit. Is it lower than it was in 2008? No, it's higher than it was in 2008. But the trend now is turning it around, and I believe, and there's a program that we have with the City of Boston, where the City of Boston will pay for students' expenses in the community colleges, and then we pick up the expenses, called the Commonwealth Commitment, as they go to finish their undergraduate career. Those programs, I believe, have made a difference. Overall, do we need more financial aid? We definitely do. The way we approach, and the Board of Higher Education, is its major agenda is an equity agenda, focusing on race. It's Black and brown students. That's where we have to make the biggest difference. So it's targeted investments. It's worked. That 10 million that was put in 2 years ago, the biggest increase in 25 years, made a huge difference in the community college segment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You actually had 10 seconds left.
Oh, there you go.
Well, there you go. You can use it the next time, okay? Good
Sure.
job. Thank you so much, Commissioner Santiago. We really do appreciate your comments. Now we're going to move on to Marcelo Suarez Orcasio. I just want to make sure that I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Chandler of UMass Boston. You now have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Is Suarez Orozco. Orozco.
Orozco. Thank you for that.
And Councilor Janey, it is an honor to address you this afternoon. I am the new chancellor of the great public university in the city of Boston, the only public university and the most diverse public university in the Commonwealth. It is a great honor. I come to you as a first generation to college, as an English language learner, as a community college transfer, who was blessed to be able to attend the other great public research system in our country, the University of California. I submit to you today that our country is facing two pandemics, two wicked, wicked pandemics. And both of these pandemics are leaving in their wake extraordinary suffering and losses in our communities. The two pandemics are the pandemic we all know, the COVID-19, that is extracting enormous pain and suffering in our communities of color. The second pandemic is the pandemic of racialized inequality. And if you want to enter the conversation, a point of departure as to the nature of the second pandemic, the pandemic of inequality that is racialized, go no farther than looking at the enormous burdens that student debt is placing in the lives of our citizens, in the lives of the members of our most underrepresented and underserved communities here in the Commonwealth, but nationwide. We will have a vaccine for the one pandemic, with a vaccine for the second pandemic, racialized inequality, and the crushing burden of student debt will come out of our collective work in the policy domain to move the needle towards a more humane, a more equitable, a more just higher education system that enables our youth to quote my colleagues in their earlier presentations, to want to have the audacity of pursuing higher education without bearing the wicked, wicked burden, crippling burden of student debt. Let me give you some numbers to complement my colleague, Dr. Santiago. The numbers are breathtaking. Today in our nation, approximately $1.6 trillion in student loan debt constitutes the second highest consumer debt category in our country. And think about what that means. Think about it is young people pursuing, as Councilor Ricardo Arroyo reminded us, the audacity of pursuing higher education that is costing them enormous challenges moving forward. It can't be that a city like Boston, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the city that gave our country so much when it comes to education, now is the time to investigate this wicked pandemic of student debt, step forward with instruments so that our young people can pursue their dreams without the fear of being robbed of their future. I applaud nuestra jefa, la consejera Mejía, for taking the lead on this existential issue of our times. We can't, this is a transgenerational robbery. We are robbing the young folk of their dream to step up, to do better for all our communities when the way out of education today is having to carry this unsustainable burden. I applaud you, and I hope the Commonwealth gets at the forefront of developing the instruments, the vehicles to address this national crisis. It is our other pandemic. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chancellor. I wanted to just really a quick point of clarification. It's my honorary Dominican sister, President Counsel Kim Janey, who is leading this particular hearing order. I came on as a co-sponsor and I'm the chair of this hearing. And while my heart is living these realities still to this day, I want to make sure that you know that the woman who is in charge and who brought this to the forefront is my sister in service who works with me on all things that deal with equity issues in the education space. So ella habla también un poquito de español, para que lo que no lo sepan ahora lo saben. She's a true champion when it comes to issues that are impacting Black and Latinx students. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew for the record. So, and you were so awesome. You were definitely right on brand with UMass Boston. That fire and that passion comes right through, Chancellor. They did a great job picking you. So I am looking forward to your tenure and your time with us. I'm gonna go on next to Dr. Valerie Robinson, President of Roxbury Community College. You now have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here, and I want to especially thank Councilor Janey and Councilor Mejia for inviting us to address this particularly critical topic of student debt. As you may know, 90% of RCC students are individuals of color, and over 80% qualify for financial aid. These are some of the most economically challenged citizens of Boston. We greatly appreciate, as Commissioner Santiago mentioned, the mayor's initiative for free tuition for BPS graduates. And we have many students who have taken advantage of this program. However, do note that this program is only eligible for traditional students. At RCC, our average age is 30. And so there are many more students who could benefit from programs like this, but they're not eligible. Students at RCC enroll because they realize that higher education has the power to change their lives. And study after study shows that students who complete even some courses after high school can increase their earning potential. And in fact, these earning potential increases obviously increase with the level of education completed. Specifically, a New York Times article a couple of years ago looked at all students across the United States and the impact of college completion on future earnings. They found that students who completed their studies at RCC or Bunker Hill, I have to say, will advance their income by 2 quartiles. Or in other words, completing an associate's degree can actually move students out of poverty. Yet, when students borrow money to attend college, this can negatively impact the significant gains to income. This is especially true if a student borrows but does not complete. Those students who are the most likely not to complete are students of color and low-income students. In addition, students of color and low-income students typically borrow more money for the same degree, are more likely to borrow money to complete their associate's degree program, and are more likely to enroll in higher price for-profit colleges. Taking out a loan for college can have the worst impact for those who default. And this is some that was already stated by the counselors here. But again, Black and brown students, low-income students are the most likely victims. Students who complete, who are the most likely to default, take out the least amount of money. Students with the least education completed are the most likely to fall behind in their payments. So just as an example, 30% of students with less than an associate's degree, so they didn't complete their associate's degree, are behind in their payments. 25% of those who complete an associate's degree are behind in their payments. Only 11% of those who complete a bachelor's degree are behind, and 5% with a graduate degree are behind. And that certainly is understandable when you think that if students have the money, if they're earning the money, then they're likely to be able to complete and pay their loans back. Again, it has been mentioned before, when a student defaults, it stays on their credit report for 7 years, including reducing their chances of leasing an apartment, getting other loans or credit cards, buying a car, or purchasing a home. Credit scores, again, and I applaud you for your efforts to reduce this impact, but it certainly can be an impact on securing employment. It, in effect, can create a cycle of poverty that is only exacerbated by the fact that they were trying to go to school to get out of poverty. You might ask how many students graduate from RCC. What is their average debt? I will tell you that it's zero. That is because we made a conscious decision not to participate in the federal loan program because of the statistics that I've cited right here. And in fact, part of my convictions come from some of my experiences in my first 2 jobs. One was I worked at Household Finance in a very poor area of Chicago, and my job was to extend loans. I actually was reprimanded by my boss because I was in trouble for trying to explain the terms of taking out the loans, and especially to immigrant families who I knew did not understand English well enough to understand what I was trying to convey. And my second experience was I worked for a for-profit college. And on the first day, I was a teacher in that institution. And one of the first things that that college did was to distribute loan applications to students in their first day of class. I really feel compelled to address this issue, and I want to let you know that I'm here to support you in any way that I can to ensure that less students, and especially those that are the least vulnerable among us, are not saddled with the burden of debt.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your efforts and for allowing us to speak today.
No, thank you for being here. I am going to just acknowledge quickly that we've been joined by Counselor Bach, and I know that Counselor Flynn forgot to use his blue hand, but I'm going to let him slide and give him an opportunity to share a few opening remarks, and then I will have my colleague Counselor Bach do the same. So, Counselor Flynn, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I want to say thank you to Councilor Mejia and Councilor Janey for their important work on this issue. They've been real champions of making sure that our students have an opportunity to go to colleges like everybody else, regardless of income. And so I want to applaud Councilor Janey, Councilor Mejia for the tremendous work you're doing. I was impressed by President Robertson and your comments, President, about the tremendous support Roxbury Community College has provided to so many in our city. Roxbury College, community college like Bunker Hill Community College, I think the real unsung heroes in the city of Boston, giving so many people, including our immigrant community, communities of color, an opportunity to get a decent education, as if you, like everybody else, doesn't matter if you're from Wellesley or any of these fancy suburbs, Roxbury Community College and Bunker Hill Community College is there to stand up for working class and low income families. So I want to say thank you to you, President Robinson. and appreciate all the work that you're doing. Getting a decent education shouldn't just be for the wealthy. It should also be for low-income families. It should be for our immigrant communities and those that may not speak English. So I want to say thank you to the panelists for the tremendous work that you're doing and trying to help students, especially during this difficult time of saving money, paying for tuition in the student debt crisis we have in the city and the country. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Thank you, Council President Janey as well.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn, for your continued support and advocacy on all things that are impacting our immigrant communities. I really do appreciate how hard you go for our people. Thank you for being here with us today as well. So I'd like to invite the professor of the family, Councilor Bach. You now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. And I just want to say I'm sorry to be late to this, but my aide, Henry Santana, has been taking excellent notes all along. So I've just caught up quickly on what people have said and just really appreciate all of you being here with us. And it's such an important issue. As Councilor Mejia says, I do teach college students, but I think it's really wrong that in this country, we should celebrate rightly the value of education and the doors it can unlock to people, but be silent about the ways in which we're attaching to that dream this incredible burden of debt that so often prevents people from doing with their education what they had hoped to do. And that forms such a barrier for so many of our low-income students. And I think it's such an important issue, and anything that we can do from the council side to make it better, to draw attention to the issue, to drive federal and state action, I think is really important. And I would love to work with all of our college presidents and others on this front. So grateful to the makers for convening this hearing today, and glad to be with you. Thanks so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Really happy to have you here. And she always asks really good questions, y'all, so just get ready for it. I'd like to move on to, I'd like to also thank Dr. Robinson for your remarks, and I would love to create an opportunity for the one and only Claudio Martinez, who is in addition to being the Executive Director of Zero Debt Massachusetts, has been instrumental in putting this hearing together. Who is a lifelong community organizer. And when we talk about all things that are impacting young people, Claudio has always been on the forefront of that conversation. So Claudio Martinez, you now have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam President, for co-sponsoring this hearing, and to all the councilors that also expressed their support for this happening today and making the time for being here. I'm honored to be invited to join this distinguished panel of higher education, student debt experts, and community and civic leaders, and to share my experience with the student debt crisis as a 35-year resident of Boston and Massachusetts. My name is Claudio Martinez. I'm the Executive Director of Zero Debt Massachusetts. We organize students, parents, and community members to amplify the voices and leadership of those most impacted by the burden of student debt in our cities and state. We want to be at the front of this fight. We are being the most affected. We are also a network of intergenerational activists and organizations fighting for student borrower protections, reinvestment in public higher education, and a higher education system that is free from student debt, like in so many countries around the world. For many years, I worked with hundreds of teens and young students to support their dreams, for most of them being the first ones to graduate from college in their families. Today, they are college graduates in their 20s and 30s with fun and creative and important jobs. But as someone mentioned before, having to consider to postpone important life decisions like buying a home, starting a family, starting a business, or going to graduate school. Because of the student debt they have accumulated to finance the first journey in higher education. The negative effects on student debt on mental health and health in general have also been well documented and are affecting our community disproportionately. As millions of Americans continue to suffer from the ongoing pandemic, it is important to remember that this crisis has not broken any systems. It has rather revealed the ways in which our economic, health, law enforcement, and higher education systems, to name a few, are already deeply dysfunctional. The inequalities that have led Black people, community of colors, and low-income people suffering the greatest effects of the ongoing crisis are the very same of those which make those same groups the most vulnerable to the effects of a student debt crisis. When the greater Boston area median net worth of Black households is $8 and the median net worth of white households is $247,000, it stands to reason that Black and Latinx borrowers take on a greater debt burden to finance their education, and their delinquency and default rates are disproportionately higher than that of their white counterparts. The student debt crisis is not only an economic justice, but a racial justice issue as well. For many years, student borrowers have internalized the message that it is their fault, that they were irresponsible, that they should feel shame for having this debt, but that time has ended. That time has ended. It's not an individual problem, it's a community problem. It's our city and our states, our, as we just heard, higher education institutions problem. Also, it's important to know that our Black, Latinx, low-income, and first-generation students are more likely to be abused by unscrupulous debt collectors and unregulated student loan servicers. And that's why we need a student loan bill of rights like the one being debated in the legislature at this time. I want to talk about why it's important that our recovery plans must protect our student loan borrowers, particularly our loan borrowers of colors, and what can be done perhaps at a municipal level. As some of you know, cities like San Francisco, DC, and New York have commissioned student debt burden reports that they have used to empower their citizens. This information I received from the Student Borrower Protection Centers, where the reports have been used in the case of San Francisco's Office for Financial Empowerment to work with other city offices to collaborate on ways to alleviate the student crisis throughout the city. For example, the identification of a student debt distress hotspots has sparked a conversation about how to outreach an enrollment infrastructure for other social services, such as housing and food assistance, so they can be leveraged through targeted local interventions and guide borrowers toward protections such as income-driven repayment. The issue is big, and I want to thank the Boston City Councilor, the co-sponsors of this hearing, and all the panelists and people watching and people testifying today. We're just starting to fight this fight, and we are ready for it.
Thank you. We've been ready. This is the moment in time, and I'm so happy that we have the most diverse council in the history, and it's being led by a woman who is relentless when it comes to racial equity. And so this is the moment in time for us to really move forward. And so, Claudia, we're really excited and grateful for your partnership in this. So thank you. So I'd love to give Kate Welbeck, you are from the Student Borrower Protection Center. We'd love to invite you to speak. You now have the floor.
Wonderful. Good evening, Chairwoman Mejia, members of the committee. Again, my name is Kat Welbeck, and I serve as Civil Rights Counsel at the Student Borrower Protection Center. And I just want to start by thanking the committee for the opportunity to speak today, especially about the vital need for data to identify Boston neighborhoods most affected by the student debt crisis, and particularly in the wake of COVID-19. especially since the economic fallout of the pandemic has really only served to exacerbate the ongoing student debt crisis. And so while this is a national crisis that touches 45 million borrowers in every corner of this country, we know that cities are on the front lines. And as I've heard all tonight, hearing everyone's stories, and you all see and know firsthand the fallout of the student debt crisis facing Boston communities, and you see that firsthand. And so we're talking about Boston specifically is home to more than 900,000 student loan borrowers, each owing on average more than $37,000 in student debt. And so again, as we've heard echo throughout the evening, this burden ripples across their financial lives. So it's affecting borrowers' abilities to buy homes, to start families, and even save for retirement. And so this burden is amplified for the most financially distressed borrowers and for local communities. And so we know that all student loan borrowers are not bearing this burden equally. As we've heard, Black and Latinx borrowers are in a vicious cycle when we're talking about student debt. So as a result of the racial wealth gap, you have Black and Latinx borrowers who are less likely to be able to draw upon familial wealth to pay for higher education. And so then disproportionately take on more debt to go to school, graduate with higher debt burdens, and disproportionately struggle in repayment. And so without action, that cycle stands to repeat when their kids go to college. And so as a result, you can imagine when we're talking about how the student debt crisis is playing out in Boston neighborhoods, whether it's Grove Hall, whether it's Roxbury, whether it's Mattapan, research has shown that the racial composition of a borrower's neighborhood is closely correlated with whether or not they're going to struggle when they're paying their student loan debt. And so the presence of these disparities at the neighborhood level, again, as a result of a longstanding legacy and persistence of racial segregation, exclusionary economic policy, has really created to this racial wealth gap. And so the severity of these disparities really call on us to analyze the impact of racial justice and racial and economic justice lens. And so after being fortunate at the front lines of the student debt crisis, cities like Boston really remain uniquely poised to be able to use cutting edge research to develop innovative policy solutions to help alleviate these debt burdens for borrowers across the city. And fortunately, you don't need to do that from scratch. Cities across the country have already begun doing this crucial work. And really, thank you, Claudia, so much. As you mentioned, the work being done in New York, San Francisco, Philadelphia, and DC, really being able to use this research from the regional Federal Reserve banks to inform how to best target limited resources for the broadest impact. So for example, again, talking about last year when the San Francisco Office of Financial Empowerment partnered with the San Francisco Regional Fed Bank to study student loan debt disparities across the Bay Area. That research was then able to inform, the report from that research was then able to inform information about debt disparities across the Bay Area. And so building on that foundational research, as Claudia was describing, the SPPC, we're now helping San Francisco identify those hotspots, right? So where city intervention is most needed to reach borrowers. So through this collaboration, we've helped San Francisco estimate that nearly 300,000 Bay Area borrowers and linked to specific neighborhoods where they're most likely to reside would benefit from existing government programs to provide student debt relief. But that relief, but those borrowers had failed to benefit from those protections before. And so by targeting repayment resources at points in which at-risk borrowers are already engaging city programs, San Francisco will be able to leverage existing intervention channels to alleviate student debt distress. And so similar things can be done in Boston. And so while older existing data suggests that Boston, we already know that these debt disparities exist. When we get that more granular research, it's able to inform lasting effective policy interventions. And so new data could allow Boston to identify key mechanisms for intervention to protect student loan borrowers, as well as, empower researchers to know more unique ways about the way that student debt is affecting Boston communities. And so I know I'm getting close to the end of my time, but I would just like to end with this again, like, as we've heard tonight, millions of student loan borrowers, including hundreds of thousands of borrowers right in Boston, are suffering under the weight of a broken system. And that's why any meaningful solution to end the student debt crisis will require action at every level of government. And that's why your work is so important. So we saw that after the last economic crisis, recovery efforts had the unintended effects of, further entrenching a lot of economic inequality. And so as you begin, down the long road of pandemic recovery, and you have this unprecedented opportunity to design a relief effort that goes beyond returning to the status quo, you really can redefine it and be able to center the communities that are often too often forced to the margins. And many of those are the same ones that have been hardest hit by the pandemic. And so, and so we're really hoping that Boston takes the critical steps of really exposing the true costs of student debt across neighborhoods. And I urge the community, the committee, to work towards the advancement of this research. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I think that Boston is uniquely positioned to be able to be one of the front forward-facing cities to bring about this change. After all, we are the birthplace of education, and we're the biggest college town. And it's a shame that most of the people who live in the city of Boston can't afford to even work here, because they are struggling with $37,000 worth of debt, which is crazy. I'd like to thank you, Kate, so much for that. I'd love to have, last but not least, another avid community organizer, also who is a student borrower herself. She's a community organizer with SEIU 509. Vanessa Snow, you now have the floor.
Good evening, and thank you, Council President Jamie and Councilor Mejia and my district councilor Arroyo and all the city councilors that are here today for inviting me to share, my public comment. My name is Vanessa Snow. I work as a community and labor organizer, but today I'm testifying as a lifelong Boston resident and alum of the Boston Public Schools and UMass Amherst, and the holder of about $28,000 in student loan debt, but at one point it was closer to 60. While I was a student at UMass, I also did a lot of college access and affordability organizing through my student government. I was one of the students who helped start Phenom while I was at UMass Amherst, and I was also an active leader in the United States Student Association. And I'm also a member of Zero Debt Massachusetts Advisory Board. And so I just want to share some of my story and the impact that student debt has had on my life, as I believe it is quite similar to many of my peers, Latinx folks, first generation college students, millennials. So for high school, I attended Boston Latin Academy, which really prides itself on being a school that prepares the majority of its students to attend college. And so college was always a goal that my parents and I had for myself. And so it wasn't a question about whether or not I would attend. But I was a senior in 2005, and around that time there was a lot of attention being placed on how few BPS students were actually enrolling in higher education. And so, I think there was a commitment from the city and the district and the philanthropic community to support community organizations in helping BPS students access higher education. So, I was part of Hyde Square Task Force's Path to College and Career program, which was able to help me through my college application process. And I ended up at UMass Amherst. While I was there, I didn't really qualify for any need-based financial aid, but I was awarded the tuition reimbursement for the MCAS Abigail Adams Scholarship. But tuition at UMass Amherst was under $3,000 while I was there. And so when you put in room and board, meals, health insurance, books, it was closer to, it increased every year. So we went from $16,000 to $19,000 to attend. So I was only able to get usually every year around $5,000 in government loans. And so I had about $10,000 at least to make up for the rest of my expenses. And so I was just told that the way to do it was to take out loans. And I think like around that time, there was even a lot less regulation. You know, like I had peers who were getting loans with unfixed interest rates. It was really, really predatory before the financial crisis, which came near the end of my time at UMass. Massachusetts is one of the states that invest least in its public higher education institutions. And so when I was there every year, there were fee increases that we tried to organize against and were unsuccessful. And my father went to UMass Amherst, and I don't even think he paid more than $1,000 a year to attend there back in his day. But I was told that student loan debt is good debt and that it would be easy to pay off in about 10 years time, as I would be eligible for better paying jobs with a college degree. So in my last year at UMass, the country entered a recession. I moved back home to Rosendale with my mom, and I spent 6 months unemployed, 3 years underemployed. And during that time, I was constantly applying for forbearance, income-based repayment plans, or I was skipping payments, messing up my credit. And it took 4 years of working full time before I could afford to live in an apartment. And even that was with 2 roommates because of Boston rent. I feel like my parents, when they were around my age, they were, you know, had the opportunity to buy a home and start their families. And I'm 33 and I still feel like that's a few more years away for me, as I want to be able to get to a place where I feel comfortable buying a home. But I also wonder how realistic it would be for me to buy a home in Boston, which is, you know, the city I grew up in, that I have roots in, that I've, you know, dedicated all of my community activism and service to. And we saw in the Boston Globe that, you know, a lot of my peers, you know, we went to college, you know, just like the district invested in us too. And then you know, we end up having to take our talent and our resources elsewhere outside of the city. You know, and so it's almost like the city doesn't get a return on the investment that they make when they're you know, funding and making all these improvements to our Boston public schools. You know, you're not getting us to be able to return back as professionals, lay down roots, open businesses. And so, you know, we should be the success stories of the city. And, you know, I'd like to think that I am, but the truth is I'm going to be priced out while, like, you know, if I'm not able to, you know, I'm paying about $800 between my government and private loans, you know, which is just like under what I'm paying for rent, but pretty close. And so just some solutions that I'm thinking about is that, you know, we need to get the private universities, which are, you know, exponentially more expensive, to step up and offer debt-free higher education to Boston residents. You know, they currently pay no property taxes and they don't comply with the pilot, even though I'm really excited to see that Councillor Bach is working hard on that and getting the property values assessed. I think the City Council can show support for the Student Loan Borrowers Bill of Rights that's currently in the State Senate. And then I think it'd be really great if the City Council could work on some sort of report or study to understand how this burden has affected our low-income communities, and perhaps establish some regulation to monitor student loan servicers. And that's basically it. Sorry if I took too long.
It's okay. She already solved all the problems, y'all. We're done. Okay. Thank you so much for all of those amazing recommendations, Vanessa. I think that, we have the council here listening in, counselors who are paying attention, and this also is being recorded. And I'm sure my colleagues will also take a listen in and also support these efforts. So I really do appreciate the valuable recommendations that you've made. I always talk about how important it is to lead with the voices of the people. And I know we have some folks who are signed up for public testimony. I'm going to do things a little bit out of order. Normally, we give an opportunity for the panelists to, our colleagues to ask questions to the panelists, but I'd love to be able to just bring in a few voices from public testimony before we dive into the questions, if that's okay with my colleagues. Yes? Okay. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask, so since most of our folks who were lined up for public testimony were probably not prepared to speak so soon, I don't want to catch you off guard, but I'm hoping if I call your name, you'll be able to join us for your public testimony. I'd like to invite Peter Barrows to share your public testimony with us if you are able to do so.
I'm ready.
Okay, awesome. Love to hear that. So Peter Barrows, you now have the floor.
Okay, my camera's off and I don't know how to turn it on because this is different.
Let me see if I can help you. I just promoted you to a panelist. I swear that I should not be doing things like that, but I think by promoting you into a panelist, I brought you into the space.
Yep, I've been promoted. Thank you for the promotion.
Yes, there you go.
Okay, good evening, and thank you to all our esteemed counselors, as well as our incredible speakers, for this important hearing and your important remarks today. And thank you for the opportunity to let me testify today. My name is Peter Barros, and I'm the proud resident of Boston. I was born and raised in Jamaica Plain, and I'm the proud son of immigrants. I'm also the executive director of La Vida Scholars, a college access after school program located in Lynn, Massachusetts. For over 13 years, I've worked in the college access field. I've worked in Boston, I've worked in New York City, and now I'm working in Lynn, Mass. I'll also share that I'm still paying off my student debt. Hopefully I'll pay it off by the time I'm 40. I attended UMass Amherst in the 2000s, and to just think about the fact that the price of UMass has gone up considerably since I attended in the mid 2000s. And so I'm here to testify, yes, about my own experience, but also on behalf of the hundreds of students I've had the privilege to support over my career. While I would like to discuss the crisis that is being faced across the country, today, right, I want to talk about Boston and Massachusetts in general. My career has been dedicated to helping young people from low-income communities and predominantly Black, Indigenous, people of color apply to, choose, attend, and graduate from college. I've tried my hardest to guide these students to make responsible choices, but I have to worry today about, what I've been helping them do, go off to college, take on financial burden. And I think, over the past 13 years, how are these students doing? How are they doing with their debt? Have I've done them a disservice when ultimately the goal is to have our young people go to college? College is widely considered a way of achieving the American dream, right? It's supposed to help us close the opportunity or the wealth gap. But then why if we know this as a society, why has the price of a college degree doubled since 1964? And since 2000, it's gone up, just in 2000 alone, since 2000 alone, it's gone up over 50%. My question is, and it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but who as the city of Boston and as the state of Massachusetts are we really committed to? Who are we committed to educating when we severely underfund our own public institutions, when we see the student debt crisis, and we're not ensuring that all students have access to free public higher education, free access to community college. Massachusetts prides itself on being a state, right, where the first college was founded, the first public high school was founded. Massachusetts has some of the highest performing schools in the country. And yet when it comes to higher ed, I worry that we're far more committed to not our own resident, we are not committed to our own residents, but everyone else who can come to our state and benefit from our great institutions. And so I'm gonna stop there, and I wanna thank everyone for sharing their stories and their testimonies, and I'm here for the fight, and let's do this.
Thank you so much, Peter Barros. I really do appreciate your testimony and for being ready to go. I know I've upgraded a few other public testimony speakers. Well, now you have joined this space, and I'd love to call on the next person. I believe is Ashley Garrett. If you are here, you now have the floor.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for this and holding this and giving people an opportunity to speak. This is such an important topic, especially as we move forward. Millennials and Gen Xers are becoming the larger demographic in the United States, and this is a big pressing issue for our generation. And as a result of that, there are so many problems surrounding that. So I guess first off, before I dive in, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ashley Garrett. I'm a native Bostonian. I grew up in the neighborhood of Roxbury, and I also was born in Mattapan. I lived in Boston most of my life. Most recently, I moved to DC 5 years ago, and I've been working for the US government, and I'm a former political appointee for the Obama administration. And I wanted to talk to you about what's going on, especially with my generation and with a lot of my friends, is that because of student loans and all the difficulties surrounding that and understanding the education, like a lot of people have highlighted, like the education is not there. And if you're a person like me, you're a first generation college student, your parents, like my father didn't even graduate high school. He went right off into the war and went to Vietnam. It's hard to understand these things. It's hard to understand, like, what do you actually know? How do you do this? And if you're lucky enough to be like me, who was able to go to private school on scholarship, then you start to encounter the issues later on when you start to move up and you go to graduate school. And unfortunately, if you want to live on the East Coast, if you want to live in Boston, you need a graduate school degree. So many people are getting caught in that, and graduate loans are even worse than bachelor's loans because you start paying them and you start owing money and interest on them when you are in school. So you don't even get the time. And as a result, so many of my friends, they have to delay things like starting a family, buying a house, starting a business. So, and it's really impacting the community and impacting the city because native Bostonians don't have a chance to access these things, to be part of the city's growth, to be part of the city's future. And as a result, we end up having a brain drain. You have people like me who end up having to move somewhere else because we can't afford to live in the city that we grew up in. We can't afford because jobs don't pay enough or we don't have enough education. And then we're starting out in the hole from student loan debt. And on top of that, many of us are also beholden to taking care of our parents. Boston used to be very much a working class city. And so many of us and everything have parents and grandparents that we are also responsible for, that we also have to take care of. And then we're trying to be future thinking and bring kids and have those things. So I implored the city council, I implore people and everything to really think about how to go about this and to raise this issue up. As someone said, Boston is a city of many firsts. And so passing legislation, passing policies and everything can really impact not just Boston, but the country as a whole. We can really serve as a model in the way we have served as a model many times over and before. I'm happy to email and send out possible recommendations, things that I have worked on, or policy that I have seen in my experience working for the federal government. There's a number of ways you can go about this, from tax incentives or tax breaks. And I really hope that something comes from this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am going to move on to Anika Von Eaton. If you are here, you now have the floor.
I am here. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Good evening, councilors. Thank you for hosting this hearing. Thank you for the panelists for your expertise and perspectives. My name is Annika Van Eaton, and I'm the Massachusetts Policy Director for UAspire, an organization founded and based here in Boston. UAspire advises high school and college students to navigate the financial aid process with the goal of completing an affordable college education. And through our work, We know that in Massachusetts, there's simply not an affordable four-year option. We advise high school students here in Boston, as well as in Cambridge, Fall River, Malden, and Somerville. And the majority of the students we advise live in low-income households, are Black or Latino, or are the first in their families to go to college. And over the past 3 years, we've reviewed over 5,000 financial aid offers with over 2,300 high school students. And the vast majority, 91%, received a financial aid offer containing student loans. The average in loans being offered for their first year of college was $5,560. And we know that that expands over the years. And so we know that student loan debt is a serious burden on students and families. It's disproportionately affecting Black and Latino students whose families have been systematically excluded from building wealth. And we urge the City Council and appreciate this hearing and urge you and the city to continue to build an understanding of the inequitable impact of student debt in Boston's neighborhoods and communities, because understanding these impacts will inform the city and state's public policies to target and help those most impacted by student debt and to build a higher education system where our students don't need to take on debt to complete a degree. Thank you so much for your time and for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Councilor Mejia, you're muted.
Oh, who dared mute me? Okay, thank you, Councilor Bach, for letting me know. I wanted to just read into the record that Councilor Asabi George did send a letter. She was unable to join us. So it states here, to the Committee on Small Business and Workforce Development. Please be advised that I will be absent from today's hearing on docket 0888 regarding the impact of the pandemic on residents with student debt. I am currently hosting a previous scheduled event with Boston parents and families on dyslexia. I will review the recording of the hearing. Despite my absence, I would like to offer my support for a student debt burden report, as well as any steps we can take to support our residents struggling with the financial burdens of this pandemic and their student debt. With so many stable middle-class jobs so many stable middle-class jobs require higher education degrees, but in the process, we saddle too many with mountains of debt. I had a student debt, and collectively 3 members of my staff currently have over 100,000 in student debt. Given the high number of recent graduates who remain in Boston, supporting them as part of our pandemic recovery would be critical, not just for their lives, but for the city. Thank you, Councilor Asabi George, the City of Boston. Just wanted to read that for the record with her support. So I would like to, just to kind of shake things up a little bit, I'd love to give an opportunity to my colleagues to ask a few questions, and then we can take some more public testimony. We do have a list of others that are still pending. So I would love to be able to give an opportunity to my colleagues to ask questions to our panelists. So I'm going to first go to the sponsor of this hearing, Councilor Janey, to see if you have any questions.
Yes, Madam Chair, and please feel free to keep a timer on me, and certainly my colleagues. There's a lot of interest here. I know other colleagues are here and will want to chime in, and there are a lot of panelists and people have offered amazing testimony. So I'll start with my thank yous. And let me just be real clear and explicit in terms of the report. You've heard a number of panelists mention the importance of a study of this issue at the local level for Boston students, which I completely, wholeheartedly support. And I know our chairwoman supports as well. And that's why it is in the actual hearing order. And so on the council side, and you've heard Councilor Asabi George talk about it, and I would assume other colleagues here would support the importance of a study to see how our students are being impacted. I know there are lots of, well, maybe not lots, but I know there are programs that help alleviate student debt, maybe even forgive student debt. I heard President Robertson mention a program that it was geared toward traditional students. That there's a program there where they're going to graduate student debt free because they're going to make sure. But someone like me who went to a community college for 2 years, but started when I was 24 years old, I wouldn't have been eligible for that kind of program. And so there's lots of ways that people are slipping through the cracks here in Boston. I would like to, one, just understand more of the playing field, what currently exists in terms of tuition reimbursement. Now, some of that's going to be employer specific, so I know you won't be able to answer, but if there are programs or opportunities that are offered at the college level around tuition reimbursement or some sort of loan forgiveness, or I know there's a program, I think, at Harvard for students who can get into Harvard who meet a certain income requirement, they can go tuition free, et cetera, et cetera. If we can kind of just lay out what currently exists in terms of students being able to opt into some opportunity there. But clearly, for all the reasons, I mean, I think Vanessa, you just laid it out perfectly, why this is such a challenge and why the city of Boston has to care about this because of the retention of this is a health and wealth issue for us in our city, and also a brain drain scenario, because we do see, particularly in Black and Brown communities, when Black and Brown folks do go away for school, oftentimes they're not coming back because there's not a lot that they can do here, particularly when they want to be able to pay off their debt. They can't live in a city where they're going to spend all of the money that they earn from their good paying job on their housing costs. So if someone could kind of just lay out where we are in terms of opportunity for debt reduction or tuition free in Boston or through the Commonwealth.
I know that there is like federal stuff, like there's like the public service forgiveness program. But for example, the Boston Teachers Union is currently suing the Department of Education nationally because something like 90% of teachers are being denied that forgiveness. You know, it's a mess, and hopefully with their next administration that changes. But I know like a lot of different unions are fighting for that. And then there is some like employment debt forgiveness in the private sector.
Now, Kansas was a model. I wonder, Commissioner, is there something here that, and I think in Kansas they had for certain parts of the state some sort of loan forgiveness. Do we have something like that here?
We don't for our public institutions. Private institutions may have some specific program, but you know, for us, it's 2/3 of the students of color that are graduating from our high schools and going on to college go to our community colleges, and that's where I think it really is about making sure that tuition and fees and other costs are covered. The Mass Grant Plus program, the one that we recently adopted, also includes part-time students, and that's one where our president, like President Robertson, came out and said, look, we need to include part-time students. It makes a huge difference. But you know, the real struggle that we have, if you look at Massachusetts and financial aid, and that's only part, debt forgiveness is one issue, but we're trying to get money into the hands of students while they're going through, so they don't have to take the debt out. Massachusetts, in terms of financial aid, ranks in the third quartile. And just as a comparison, we put in about $100 million. The state puts in $100 million for financial aid. A third of that goes to our private institutions. We have about the same population as Tennessee. Tennessee ranks in the first quartile. Tennessee puts in $300 million. Tennessee is nowhere near Massachusetts in terms of its income per capita. So while we are among the wealthiest states in the nation, we are among the worst in terms of putting financial aid. And that's one of the things that we've been trying to build back, because you know, our students of color in particular rely on both federal and state financial aid.
Right. And so more of it much more of it should be in the form of grants too. I worry about the burden that students of color are kind of left with in terms of taking on this debt in the first place. I'd like to get into, so, you know, people on the panel have made a case for the importance of the study We've had the opening up the panel with public testimony, which I think was great, Chairwoman Mejia, to kind of just set the stage with real people who are experiencing this debt firsthand. I'd be interested if anyone on the panel wants to answer what kind of parameters or criteria do we want this report to kind of lift up for us, if we could get, you know, on the mayor's side, as well as on the Fed side, or whoever might partner on the outside to get such a report done. What is it that we want this report to cover? Should we spend some of my time? I've got lots of data questions trying to understand the issue better and how it's impacting students of color. And I could spend a lot of time doing that, but since this, you know, a concrete solution has come up in terms of helping us understand specifically how it's impacting Boston students of color, I'd wonder what we'd put in such a report, or what kinds of questions would we want answered. Anyone want to tackle that, or I can go into more data specific questions?
Oh, well, yeah, I just wanted to be super mindful that
Running out of time.
Oh, we ran out of time probably like a minute and a half ago, but you're the president of the council, so I let you live a little bit longer.
That's my last question then for now. And if there's another round, I'm happy to give space for my colleagues. But I would like to spend some time, if that's okay, Madam Chair, if not now, at some point, talking about what would we like to see in such a report.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, I think it's a great question, and I would love an opportunity. Either Claudio, I'm not sure if you want to answer that question, but I think it's a great question for us to bring to the floor. So Claudio, could you address it, please?
Yes, great question. We have asked the other cities that have produced their reports for their data set questions, and they have provided them to us. I'm going to ask our colleague from the Student Borrowers Protection Center to give us perhaps more of the detail of those questions in a short summary, because it's a lot of data questions. Kat, would you do that?
Oh, gladly, and thank you. Thank you so much, Claudia. And one thing that we could do too, because I know we're short on time, is also if you'd like us to like follow up with the more detailed questions, just so you have all of them. But for example, if it's looking at zip code level, at the zip code level, also comparing that with the Fed's credit panel data. So it might have the level of delinquency and or how many borrowers are delinquent, default, and then being able to kind of cross-reference that with the racial composition of that zip code. So you're able to kind of get a more granular idea of what's going on in each different one. Like that's just like one example, but it's just a series of questions just to kind of get across like understanding of what is the demographic of this zip code, and then combining that with insight that they're able to glean from the Fed credit panel data. But kind of like I mentioned, and Claudia also did as well, but because the other cities have done this, that the actual like the formulas for those data sets are already formed. So it's just a matter of applying it to Boston zip codes. But happy to follow up with that information, and so you have a little bit more detail about all the questions.
I have also a quick I think it'd be interesting to hear about, you know, tracking data in regards to Boston Public School alums, because, you know, if you were to also just like look at zip codes, or even just like the amount of international students we have here, or students that come in from out of state, I think, you know, you're dealing with like a different type of wealth. But if we're looking at what are the pathways, like, you know, as you're encouraging Boston Public School students who are majority students of color, majority working class, you know, to go to college, what impact is that really having in our neighborhoods?
And I would also add, since the work has been done through the Mayor's Office of Workforce, through Trinh Nguyen's office, that you ask for some detail on the data that's been collected given the new scholarship for BPS students. So there's about 3 years of statistics that can be gathered to see what the effect of offering that scholarship has been and who's been served by those dollars.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. C, that great question generated a lot of response. So I really do appreciate Councilor Janey bringing it into the space. I know I'm going to just insert a few of my privileges as the chair. That's right. I have a few questions that I'd like to ask before moving on to my colleagues. I'm going to do things a little bit out of order here. Claudio, this question is specifically for you, and I'm just wondering, student debt could be traumatizing. I know living in poverty is a mental health weight that we all carry the burden of, and I'm just curious as to whether or not you can talk a little bit about if there's anything that you've learned around student debt as it relates to a trauma-informed lens. Has there been any any data or any information out there that looks at the correlation between student debt and trauma?
Yeah, in the last 2 years or so, there has been several reports on this issue of mental health, depression, and even other physical health that have been tied to the student debt burden and the inability of young people to project a future or the future that they were projecting before having been crushed by this debt. One thing that community organizing is good at in terms of mental health is because we look at these issues not as individuals, but as communities. And the first thing that we look at is who has benefited from 20 years of tuition hikes and increases at 4% a year nonstop. I'll tell you what, when you look at the line of increases and you look at the line of the money, the billions of dollars that student loan servicers have made, with CEOs making 50, 60, $70 million a year plus bonuses, it is clear that this has been a game that has been set up for our students to fail. And the final touch to that system was to make this debt not dischargeable in bankruptcy, the only debt in the United States. So people like Donald Trump or even Henry Ford can go through several bankruptcies and become then again reestablished as reputable members of society. But we don't give that opportunity to our student borrowers. In fact, we threaten them with taking the licenses that they earn and will help them perhaps make these payments back. We need to think also where has we been and where has we want to go in terms of higher ed institutions. I think as a father of someone that attended Northeastern University 12 years ago, too many restaurants, too many TVs, too many gyms. Is it higher education really about all these things? Shouldn't we perhaps spend the money on tutors and mentors, which has been proven is the best thing our low-income Black, Latinx, and people from our communities will benefit the most? Please save the gyms, is my advice. But let's try to envision a new type of higher ed that's good for all.
Thank you for that, Claudio. I really do appreciate that. My next question is going to be for Chancellor Suarez. I'm wondering, UMass Boston has a lot of students from different parts of the world who speak different languages. And I'm just curious of what kind of language access services are available for students who need to take out loans. I'm just curious about how do we go about translating, and then how many students, if you know, are currently in debt, and if you happen to know the dollar amount.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity for me to share my thoughts. First, here is a great paradox. Boston it's the magnet, it's the beacon. Students from all over the world look to us for all matters pertinent to higher education. But our students in the great city of Boston come to our city predominantly one of two ways. Either they come through Logan with round trip tickets. They're going to come, they're going to study in our extraordinary universities, and then they're going to go back to their cities, to their states, to their country. Our students at UMass Boston come through the K-Circle. They are from the peninsula. They are from our neighborhoods. They are from the city of Boston. And they will stay with us moving forward. We at UMass Boston, I'm very, very proud to say, educate the youth and the students, older students that come back or that take longer because of the vicissitudes and the challenges of life to complete the dream of a college degree. We serve students of the peninsula, of the city, of the Commonwealth. Now, I am, it's with mixed emotions that I say that whereas the national average student loan debt, as my colleague, Dr. Santiago articulated, is over $32,000. In the Commonwealth is slightly below that. For our students at UMass Boston, it is significantly below that. It is still too much. And it is too much because the great paradox I articulated, we educate the students of the world, but we are not investing at the higher education level in the education of the students from our city, the students that will stay with us, that will make the promise of what a higher education means a reality moving forward. And therein lies the challenge. Without investing in our public higher education system, this drama will not go away. When I started my career in this country as a student, many, many, many years ago, public universities, I was blessed. I arrived in our country and I went to community college and I transferred to the great University of California, Berkeley. That was a time when the bulk of the budget for the public research university came from the state. Today, for us in the Commonwealth, it is less than 20 cents per dollar that are funds invested in our public education system from the Commonwealth. So this is the nature of how the algorithm that is at the root of the crushing burden that is student debt in our city and in our Commonwealth has come about. We need to refocus on public education. No city in the history of the world has thrived without investing in its public higher education.
Thank you.
We have the perception of an embarrassment of riches because we have so many of the leading universities in the world here in our neighborhood. I was a professor at one of them across the river from where I sit now. I sit now in Dorchester.
Thank you.
We need to do better with our public institutions.
Thank you, Council Chan. I'm going to upgrade you to Counselor. Chancellor, muchas gracias por esa pasión. We have to move on. I'm getting all types of signals that we need to keep moving on. I've overextended my 5 minutes. I did have a question for Vanessa, but I'll save it for my next round, just to be respectful and mindful of my colleagues. I'd like to now move on. Just giving my colleagues an opportunity. If you do have any questions, this will be the time for you to ask. I'm going to go in the order of arrival. Councillor Flynn from District 2, you now have the floor. I was just informed that Councillor Flynn has left the building. I am moving on now to Councillor Ricardo Arroyo from District 5. If you're still with us, you now have the floor.
Thank you, and I'm gonna make mine just one question, and thank you everybody on the panel. Specifically on this panel, is there anything currently happening on a municipal level that can either be amplified or supported? And if not, if there's nothing like that in terms of addressing student loan debt, what things can be envisioned in terms of a municipal response to this? Obviously, there's a bunch of different ways we have to advocate federally and statewide, but is there a municipal game plan here essentially that we can work to execute? And that's to whoever feels like they can answer that, or if it's multiple people, then it's multiple people. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to, you're more than free to answer the question. Whoever feels that they are equipped to do so. Well, I'm hoping one of the panelists.
Can I, Madam Chair, if I may, one example, and I want to certainly hear from the panelists, but one example is our advocacy around this report in partnership with an outside entity. So could be the Fed, and we've got that as hopefully a takeaway that we are able to run with and get done. But if there's something in addition to that, that someone on the panel wants to address?
I would ask President Roberson, who has had experience with the Boston program that supports students at her, which we think is it's a recent program, so we haven't evaluated it, but we're hopeful that it's working well and it gets students not only into our community colleges, but also gets them on the road, because then we pick up the tab when they go for a 4-year degree at UMass Boston or any other institution within the public system. So I would ask her to comment on how well she sees that program working for her institution.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. The one thing I will say is that for the students who come directly from high school, it's a great opportunity. What I'm seeing is constantly, and I'm talking to parents often and potential students, the word is not really out there. So people don't understand that this is an opportunity open and available to them and their families. So that's one thing that I think might be missing, is more publicity and more understanding, especially with my BPS partners, so that they understand the advantage here. The second thing, I'll just reiterate that this works well for students that are the traditional students, but most of the students who have the biggest trouble in accessing higher ed are those who wait a year because of family obligations or, whatever the case may be. And so if you do not go directly from high school to college, then you're not eligible. A third of the students at RCC have foreign high school diplomas. So that means that they are another huge population that we want to serve, that need to have access to a comparable set of funds. And many times those students are not eligible. And I think that, again, as we think about debt and the opportunities, we also find that there are students that cannot access their family's financial documents. That's a population that oftentimes really does not have a recourse in terms of accessing the financial aid that's available and pursuing college. And so those are the populations that I would be concerned about, and seeing if there are ways to expand those opportunities.
I noticed two
that,
things.
the pilot program, universities are allowed to include the financial aid that they offer. So for instance, like Boston University, they actually put their BTS scholarship program, they include that in their pilot reporting. So that's also another city area to look into in terms of providing more financial aid to students.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. Two things. I know that Claudio, I see your hand up. And I also know that Peter, although he's not an official panelist, also raised his hand. But I am all about all means all and giving everyone an opportunity to be heard. So Peter, I'm going to go first to Claudio and then to you, okay? Claudio, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. In answering to the question of Councilor Arroyo, I think I agree with the prior comments of many of the panelists. We need more information. Last month, with the support of the National Consumer Law Center and their team on student debt, we led a workshop of about 2 hours that really clarified to everyone present the complexities of this system of student loans. You not only have to be a lawyer specialized on student loans to really understand what we have created. So simplifying that for residents and letting them know of their rights through perhaps a similar campaign like we did with COVID, where I receive at my home a 2-pager saying, during COVID, do this, do that. During COVID, student borrowers shouldn't do this, they should do that. These are their rights and this is who they can call. Now, I'm wondering if the city of Boston has somebody that we can call. And that will be another suggestion to try to find out who in the city may become the champion of this issue and able to communicate with the community and with the students and parents.
That's a great recommendation. I don't know if anyone exists in the city to serve as that voice and that facilitator, but I do think it's another great recommendation to offer. I'm going to go next to Peter, and then I'm going to move on to Councillor Campbell. You'll be next.
I'll be very, very quick. I just think it's important to highlight that this isn't a student debt crisis only, because many families also step in and take out Parent Plus loans. Grandparents do it. So it's not just a student debt crisis. We have 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old parents, grandparents that are stepping in and taking out 10K, 20K to help their students. So it's a debt crisis, obviously affecting 25 to 30-year-old, 18 to 30-year-olds, young adults, but it's affecting our parents, our grandparents, everyone.
That's such a great point. Being first generation, it took the entire village to get me through college. My mom working 2 to 3 jobs. Also because I didn't have the best credit, she had to apply for certain loans on my behalf. And as a result of that, also incurred a lifetime of debt still, right? And so I think that that's a really valid point, that we need to really look at this whole conversation in terms of poverty intervention and interrupting the cycle of poverty for so many low-income communities that were the ones who continue to bear the brunt of all of this. And I'm also just curious to the role of our workforce here in the city of Boston. And I know that there are a lot of businesses that provide opportunities for people to work, and then they take on the debt of that student. I'm just wondering whether or not the city could do more of that. And maybe if you're going to be doing business in the city of Boston, if there's ways to incentivize some of these employers to help support that's something else that I think that we might be willing to explore further. But I did go off course here and wanted to make sure that we give Ricardo, the time has been over, but I know that there are lots of folks who asked, who answered your question. Wasn't sure if you had any other questions that you'd like to bring to the floor. If you are talking, we can't hear you. Councilor Arroyo, we'll come back to you.
Hey, yeah, no, that is very helpful. Thank you so much for folks on the panel, and I'll see the rest of whatever time I may have had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Councilor Campbell, if you're with us, you now have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Mejia. I was pushing it so I could stay. And first of all, thank you all for your incredible work in this space. And Claudio, just, the point, first of all, thank you for your work. I know we had lunch, we've talked about this issue so much, and your leadership on this issue along with everyone else. And I think it's really important that we continue to inform our constituencies that these systems are designed in such a way to create the debt that we see in communities and sort of perpetuate this racial wealth gap in the city of Boston and in this country. I mean, how you talked about bankruptcy and what is eligible and what isn't, all of that, I think people don't understand the level of intentionality that exists in systems, political systems and government systems to create this. So I think us educating folks around that is incredibly important. I also wanted to just raise up, I know Councilor Arroyo had a similar question that I would have asked around what we can do, and Councilor Janey, I had a lot of questions around data. So I fully support any of the data requests or reports, anything I can do to assist in that endeavor. If it's pushing people to fund that, I mean, you have incredible philanthropic institutions right here in Boston that are looking at so many issues right now in the midst of COVID that I think would love to be a part of this. So anything I can do, I'll tell Council Mejia and Janey, happy to support those efforts around the data and painting the picture, not just the story of why this exists in communities of color in particular, but also the nature and the extent of the problem. I don't think I fully know either. And I represent largely Dorchester and Mattapan, which is predominantly a district of color, a whole host of immigrant communities. And we don't have a sense of, as Peter was suggesting, how this shows up for the individual, for the family, and then of course the community as a result. So anything I can do in terms of that information gathering would be, count me in as a supporter. And then I guess my last question, outside of what the municipality can do, so what Boston can do in partnership with the state on this issue, employers do play a big role. I'm thinking already about just the role we are pushing them to play in the early ed and care and daycare and provider care conversation that is happening right now, where people are recognizing that this issue connects deeply to the economy in our country. And so employers are stepping up in different ways. So I'm curious, what are employers doing? What is the push to get employers involved with respect to this issue? Because we know that many folks who carry debt can also be reimbursed in some significant ways by employers, which help in this regard, even by, say, for example, some law schools that fund some forgiveness programs for lawyers who want to go into the public interest space. And there's been a push for law schools to expand those type of programs to allow for greater participation by their graduates in public service employment positions. So I'm curious what employers are currently doing and how we might as a city push them to do more. I mentioned earlier the ordinance piece with respect to prohibiting them from using credit, from barring people from getting employment opportunities, which is going to be critically important coming out of COVID. But on the opposite side, how do we incentivize more employers to show up to help with this issue? That's my question. And I can save the rest for some follow-up conversations, Councilor Mejia. I did have some questions for the administration, which I can also send separately, particularly on the data piece. And Vanessa, thank you as well for sharing a lot of your personal story as well. And Valerie, it's so great to see you. But thank you all. And that's my only question for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it goes in line with, the whole idea of, as a city, this is where the opportunity exists for us to lean in, and also employers, those who are doing business here in the city of Boston. Just curious, to Councilor Campbell's question, what are some of the ways that we can, who are, if any, who are the employers that are doing right by students? And who are the ones that we need to target
Oh man, maybe all of them. Go ahead,
Yeah, let's
Claudia.
go. I'm ready to fight. You know me. Let's go, Claudio. Vamos. What's up?
I don't have the list, but there is a number of companies that clearly understand that student debt payments for their employees is a benefit that certainly adds to the bottom line. Now, have the larger institutions of business leaders like the Chamber of Commerce or some of the other ones that have been newly formed had conversations about this issue? I'm not sure. I think we are at a point where it's a great moment to engage our leaders in the business community, as well as our leaders in the philanthropic community. At the end of the day, reinvestment in public higher education is going to come through raising taxes. Hopefully raising taxes to those who have so much money, and I'm talking about multi-millionaires and the 10 or 20 billionaires we have in Massachusetts. Many of who understand and actually agree that their taxes should be raised so we can have an education of the quality that the world expects from Boston and Massachusetts. And that is a conversation that we will continue having.
And just on that point, and then I see Valerie, but just on that point, Claudio, on the, the other stakeholders, and this was mentioned earlier with respect to pilot, higher ed institutions clearly play a role here too, as a major stakeholder. But the piece that I think you raise up too, that is critically important, and I'm a Princeton alum, right? The Ivy Leagues are not ever going to have the capacity to provide the educational opportunities that this country is going to need in order to create the labor force that is necessary to meet the demands of our economy. And that investment in our community colleges, our public institutions is so critically important. And I have a lot of folks in my district who work at UMass, who do a lot of work with UMass and RCC and other Bunker Hill. So I want to flag that too as critically important. In any way I can be an ally on that piece, let me know for sure, because it continues to, I think, be lost in many conversations when you talk about investment in higher ed institutions. So I just wanted to put that out there. And sorry, Valerie, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, not at all. I just wanted to add a bit to what I know about this. So I don't have employers who are offering loan forgiveness that I'm aware of, but I have a plethora of companies that will offer tuition reimbursement, and companies who come to RCC that, for lack of a better descriptor, will prepay for their employees to take classes with us. So two examples that I'll note is, one is SCIU currently is offering their members an opportunity to take classes towards a degree if they want to go into health sciences. And so we've been working with them to provide classes for their membership. And there are also companies that provide incentives for current employees to take promotions based on whether or not they will enroll in classes. So I'm seeing more on the prevention of debt than I am for the alleviation of debt.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Campbell, I just wanted to let you know that the 5 minutes are way over. So do you mind if we move on? Is that okay?
No, to be fair to my colleagues. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all.
So much. I'm going to go on now to Councillor Bach. You now have the floor.
Thank you so much, Councillor Mejia. And thanks again to everyone for being here. It's been alluded to a few times, but we have a lot of universities in this town of all types, right? Community colleges, four-year universities, at public, private, and I represent a large number of them. There's a lot crowded in District 8. And I guess I find myself thinking a lot about something that's been raised a few times here, which is about how the whole structure of this university economy has really developed over the last few decades to encourage this kind of outsized debt. So there's been a reference to obviously the way the federal government has structured that debt, made it something that you can't get out from under. And we've got a lot of lenders making a lot on that process. But also the reality is that I think someone alluded to the fact that our universities have gotten deep into the habit of building very fancy gyms, very fancy dorms, sort of chasing the shiny building pursuit. And all of those buildings get, debt financed. Our universities end up very leveraged. It's part of the reason why a lot of them couldn't really afford to have a semester where they didn't have in-person instruction, which drove some economic decisions this summer. And I guess it just feels to me like it's going to be very hard for us to unwind this clock structurally without changing the whole way that business model is built, because we're just encouraging this kind of debt fundamentally. And I think our community colleges, and I'm so glad we have RCC represented, are a great counter example of how you run a university with less overhead, less of a proliferation of deans, less of an obsession perhaps with the physical plant, although obviously you still have to make investments in the physical plant. And so I wondered if any of the panelists, both the university leaders and others, could speak a little bit to how we could actually change the structure of this market, and how we could encourage our universities in Boston to produce a less expensive product. Because that's the other, right? There's two ways of solving this problem. One is to subsidize the expensive product for our students who are most in need. But the other is to recognize that the product is just becoming totally unsustainable vis-a-vis what people can expect to earn with their degrees. And that we really need to make it more efficient and cheaper in a way that it was not that long ago. So I just wondered if anyone on the panel has ideas for that, because I think about it every time a university comes to me to talk about the new building project they want to embark on. And I'm looking for strategies and things to push them to kind of reorient their thinking towards.
That's right. That's a great question. I'm wondering if anybody on the panel is interested. I'm looking to you, Carlos Santiago. I'm not sure if this would be an appropriate question, but I don't know, for some reason it sounds like it might fall under your...
I don't know if it falls under the Department of Higher Education, which focuses on the public institutions, but there's a broader historical issue that I think Councillor Bach is bringing up. And I think you have to go back. This has been a 40-year issue. It was in the 1980s when the federal government began to move away from giving grants to students to giving loans. And they did this because we were so successful. Higher education was so successful that the lifetime earnings of students was considerably more if you went to college than if you just had a high school degree. So the perspective was, well, if you're going to benefit so much from higher education, you pay for it, student, not either the state, local, or federal government. And that's put us on a road to move the burden to students. And Claudio had mentioned as well when he talks about these new athletic facilities. It was an arms race. It was basically an arms race for talent. And the institutions with most of the money and the largest endowments bought up the talent. And the other institutions tried to keep up with them. And that created a structural model that we are seeing now was not sustainable for students of color, and is closely to the point where it's not going to be sustainable for a lot of other institutions. One thing we have authority over both private and public institutions in the Commonwealth, and we're looking at the financial impact on those institutions of COVID-19. And there are a lot of institutions that are struggling. Let me toss another figure out there, which is the one that really concerns me, and it's COVID-19 related. We are seeing that 37% of African-American students and 27% of Latinx students in Massachusetts that were planning to go to college are not going to college. Those are huge numbers. That's our future labor force. And basically, especially Latinx and African-American students don't want to bring COVID-19 to their communities that have already been ravaged. And the last thing they're thinking about is going to school. They've lost their part-time and full-time jobs, and they're dealing with the health effects in their communities. and they are stepping away. My big concern, what keeps me up at night, is that those students will never return, never go back to college. And I think that's going to be a travesty.
Thank you so much, Mr. Santiago, for that. Just curious, Councilor Boggs, the timer did go off. I'm trying to keep everyone within the 5-minute mark. I don't have the gavel you have, but I have a phone here, okay?
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. I'm good. And again, I really appreciate you having this hearing and everybody being here and anything. I think the point about pilot and how we address, community benefits in this direction is well taken. And I think in general, whatever we can do to encourage our universities to structure themselves to be more affordable to people is really important. So thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interject. I noticed that the Chancellor was trying to weigh in on this very question as well.
Absolutely.
If it's okay with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting me know. I don't have it on speaker. I don't have it on the gallery view. So I do appreciate you advocating on his behalf. Of course, I could never silence the Chancellor. Go on ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. In regards to the reflection by Councilor Bogg, I want to refer to our experience at UMass Boston. We saw our enrollments remain steady. Actually, today we were where we were a year ago to the day, meaning our students voted with their feet. They came back, they enrolled, and they're staying with us. So while there is a lot of suffering that flows from the pandemic, there are areas where we are beginning to see the outline of a set of good news and good opportunities for the future. I believe that the migration overnight to remote teaching and learning, and because of our demography, because of the students we serve, we very early on made a judgment to migrate the bulk of our teaching and learning to remote. And this proved to be a very, very wise decision. I have to say, I was a dean back in the West Coast at that time, so I had nothing to do with that judgment, but it was a very, very smart judgment. We are learning an enormous amount from the online vehicles that we are developing. I believe higher education will be transformed permanently moving forward. And there may be here important opportunities to address the social justice inequities that characterize bricks and mortar education in our country, in higher education. So we are learning a lot about the remote experience. I believe that the lessons we're harvesting today can and will be put to use to serving our racialized, minoritized communities in ways that are positive, they're enhancing. I completely concur with Claudio when he said, my hermano, when he says that it can't be about the gym or the next swimming or the race to create not students or citizens, but consumers of products. It has been extremely negative in higher education. We need to focus on, again, how do we teach that which is truth, logic and science, that which is good, justice, that which is beautiful, aesthetics. And we don't need the fancy gyms and the fancy this and that. We need to reprioritize higher education for the communities we are responsible to serve. I completely agree with the councilwoman when she said the Princetons of the world will never have the bandwidth to move the needle the ways our country needs to have the needle moved when it comes to higher education and justice. So the disaster of the pandemic also will open new opportunities to serve our communities in innovative, in more agile, in more equitable, in more just ways. And at UMass Boston, we are harvesting what we're learning, and we're going to reimagine, and we're going to create new instruments, vehicles to serve our diverse populations in innovative ways that will maintain the costs down so that our students don't have to make a trade-off between the dream of a college degree and the wicked, wicked cost student debt is extracting on our most vulnerable communities.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I really do appreciate your thoughts around that. And I also would just like to advocate on behalf of a lot of the students who are living in BHA, which is the Boston Housing Authority, a lot of those developments that are right in the UMass campus. Like, if we're really serious about righting the wrong, this is really an opportunity for UMass Boston to lean into those students who live in those developments and ensure that they have access to UMass Boston tuition free, as well as if we have an opportunity to look at students who have who have incurred this debt that are Boston residents right now, if there's a way for us to do more of a retro aspect, so it's not just the students who have just recently graduated, but if we can go back to Peter's point in terms of like the intergenerational burden that so many families are carrying right now as a result of student debt. I mean, I think this conversation is so much bigger than this hearing, but it does create an opportunity for us to really think about how we're going to push universities and employers across the city of Boston to do. I just muted myself by mistake. I am going to move on. I believe all of my colleagues have had an opportunity to ask questions. Before I move on to the public testimony, I would love to give Councillor Janey another opportunity for another round of follow-up questions if you have any.
Oops, sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Madam Chair, but given the hour, I'd love to just dive into public testimony. Certainly, if my colleagues have any final remarks, I'd defer to them. But just given the hour, I'd like to dive in and then suggest that we keep this conversation going and keep it in committee so that we can circle back with panelists and really kind of look at those data set questions to make sure that we've got some good follow-up, at least on the council side in terms of moving forward around this report. Is that okay with you? Thank you. No. And many thanks to everyone for joining us. I know the hour is late, but I want to especially thank the panelists again and all those who are with us this hour. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. I'm going to move on. We have several other public testimony folks who are in line waiting, and I also would like to echo my gratitude to the panelists who participated in helping to inform the conversation, our panelists who joined, whether you were living the realities or doing the work or experiencing these issues yourself. As you know, as a council, our goal is to create spaces for those who are living the realities to inform our thinking so that we can co-design what are the right steps for us to take. And I think that this particular hearing has done just that. And I am ready to dive right in and push for that report and to work alongside you to ensure that we get the information that we need to help alleviate student debt. So I'm going to move on to the next, our next public testimony, and that is Emmy Takanima. You now have the floor. And I believe I upgraded you to a panelist too, so we can see you. Awesome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Takanami. I use she, her, hers, and I'm the Policy and Community Organizing Director at Zero Debt Massachusetts. First, I want to quickly thank President Janey and Councilor Mejia for your leadership on this issue and sharing your platform with us for this important conversation, and to all of our panelists, and most importantly, our student loan borrowers who have bravely and generously shared their personal experiences with us tonight. I'm going to be reading 2 short written testimonials we received from ZDM activists in the interest of time, because we received many more than that, who are student loan borrowers that couldn't make it tonight to this hearing. Ironically, most told me they couldn't make it tonight because they had to be at their 3rd or 4th part-time jobs while being enrolled in school full-time. These written testimonials, as well as others that can't be read tonight, are going to be made available to all counselors on record as they were shared via email with y'all. So the first one is from Adrian Young. Quote, I'm a current master's student at Boston University and have taken out loans to fund both my undergraduate and graduate degrees. During school semesters, I've worked nearly full time and worked more than 40 hours a week each summer to attempt to decrease the amount of money I need to borrow. And yet I will graduate with an MSW in May and about $70,000 in debt. The debt weighs on me constantly and creates an enormous amount of anxiety around the income I will have after my degree. Additionally, I recognize the many opportunities I have missed throughout my education since I have been unable to fit additional unpaid opportunities in my already packed schedule. For me, my student loan debt means that I will not be able to continue to live in Boston after completing my master's degree, as I'll be forced to move to a more affordable location, taking all of my innovation and skills to other communities. I believe many of my peers are in similar situations, and this enormous burden should be a focus for legislators as my generation deals with the disproportionate impact on our ability to contribute to society, unquote. So thank you to Adrian. And the second testimony I'll be reading is from Jordan Ahmed. Quote, my name is Jordan Ahmed, a graduate student at Boston University studying social work and public health. I'm a queer South Asian Muslim, and I am the first in my family to attend college, let alone graduate school. I'm offering testimony in support of creating a Boston student debt report to better assess who in Boston is most affected by the student debt crisis. We need this report in order to create city and statewide policies that support those among us most impacted by this crisis. In many ways, I am one of the lucky ones. I was fortunate to receive some scholarships for both my undergraduate and graduate school career. However, despite receiving significant scholarships, I am more than $55,000 in debt. Since graduating from Ohio Wesleyan in 2013, I have worked as many as 3 jobs at a time as a special education teacher, a professional dancer, a depression prevention counselor for elders in Boston, and a research assistant. However, despite working upwards of 50 hours a week and now attending graduate school, I've had to defer my student loans indefinitely. I have never earned enough income to pay any amount of my student loans since graduating. This year, due in part to the COVID-19 pandemic, my university was not able to provide me with financial support, which has pushed me to either cut back on my education and stall my career plans in helping careers with modest salaries, or take additional student loan debt. Already burdened with significant student loans, I've opted to put my education on hold while I seek employment in a challenging job market. I encourage you, members of the Boston City Council, to create a Boston student debt report to begin the very important process of supporting Bostonians who are struggling under the pressure of their student loan debt, struggling to pay rent, to start or support their families, to feed themselves, to survive. Thank you for your time and attention to this incredibly important issue. So thank you, Jordan and Adrian, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much. Amy, I hear my story in that testimony. I worked 3 jobs while I was in college, and I still walked out with student debt. So trust, I really do appreciate those testimonies. Thank you so much. I'm gonna move on now to Jaron Malmarani, and you're gonna school me and make sure that you correct me on how to pronounce your name. But I believe it's Mariani.
You got it, yeah. Heron Mariani. Thank you so much. My name is Heron Mariani. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a JP resident. I'm an activist and member of the Zero Debt Massachusetts Coalition. And I am a student debt borrower living here in the city of Boston. Thank you, big thank you to our chair, Councilor Mejia, to the council president and sponsor, Kim Janey, to all the counselors who spoke tonight. It's incredibly powerful to me after how long we've been working on this work with Claudio, with Amy, and the Zero Debt Massachusetts team, to see the recognition that this is getting and that it deserves to be getting from the city council. And we're going to keep pushing it across the state to the state legislature as well. This is incredibly personal for me. I worked 2 jobs the entire time I was in college, 3 jobs for a few semesters as well. That was pretty tough. I'm originally from St. Paul, Minnesota, but I came out here to attend Northeastern University. And I was the first person in my family not to attend college, but to take out student loans, to go to a private university, to leave my parents' house, to leave the state in pursuit of, higher education and that, furtherment of the American dream in our family. And to this day, my parents and I still struggle with the paperwork we received from the feds and from Sally Mae, like, am I paying this loan or that loan? And how much is the interest rate on this one? And, it's all over the place. And to echo what Claudio said earlier, you don't get systems like this on accident. They were designed to be predatory. And they put people like me in the positions that I'm in because they are profiting off of it. When I graduated, they were expecting me to pay something like $600 per month. And that was just from my Sally Mae payments. Mind you, I also had, payments from the feds to make. And with the feds, where I was able to get into an income-driven repayment plan and pursue my options, Sally Mae gave me every answer except for a helpful one every single time that I called them. To the point that, I did restructure, I did refinance my loans with Sally Mae. But just a few weeks ago, I woke up to finding out that my credit score had dropped by 150 points on a casual Tuesday morning when I'm trying to also, work and everything else. And what had happened was I set up a payment plan with Sally Mae. And one of the payments that I worked with the operator to schedule happened to fall out of my reporting window by a week. And that being said, I set up those dates specifically with the person on the line from Sally Mae, and we picked each date that I would make a payment. And then come to find, one of these was a week outside of my payment window. And so, once that report went through a month later, boom, everything is, defaulted, everything is bad, 150 points off my credit score. My credit score was nothing to write home about to begin with. I didn't have a credit card until I was 23. God bless me if it wasn't for my partner, my girlfriend that I'm incredibly lucky to have. I wouldn't have even been checking my credit score. I would have never had a credit card because there just wasn't a culture of learning these things in my family about credit management, how to build your credit. And so now I'm learning these things at 25. Like I said, I'm incredibly lucky to have my partner teaching me these things, coaching me. But there are lots of people who don't know their options to push back against the Sally Mae operator who is telling you multiple times per day, multiple times a week, this is your fault. And you saying, no, it's not. And just continuing to push back and push back. I ultimately did get my personal issue resolved, but it's enigmatic of the system that we are unfortunately all oppressed by, and why we need stronger protections in Massachusetts, why we need a student loan bill of rights, why we need to do research, because we all believe in science, and if you don't study the problem, then you can't find a cure. So I'm incredibly happy that this hearing is happening. I'm incredibly grateful for the space y'all have allowed me to take up in it. And I would really, really, advocate for and push that we have this research done and that we do all we can to protect the student borrowers of Boston. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerome. Really great to have you here. I'm gonna move on. You're giving me some flashbacks about Sally Mae, because I used to be like, do not answer, please, because they would call all the time at all hours. But anyways, thank you so much. You're bringing me back to that space. I'm gonna ask Eddie Fisher. I know you've been patiently waiting. Really do appreciate you being here with us tonight. You now have the floor. If you're still with us. He probably was like, nah, these people made me wait too long. I'll come back to you, Eddie. I'm gonna move on to Isabella DePina. I believe you're still with us. And maybe you can go off mute. There we go.
Thank you for the space. I just wrote a little statement. Hello, my name is Isabel DePina. I am a returning oldest full-time student at UMass Boston. I am a senior and I'm going with my MBA in Labor Studies and Conflict Resolution. I am a student organizer for Phenom. I am a parent of 2 children. My son is Linnell, he's 20 years old, and he first year college students. And my daughter Rosaline is 13 in the 8th grade. I have $60,000 of student loan debt and can only go to UMass Boston because of a scholarship I received. Because of my experience with student loan debt, I am worried for my children to go on higher ed and to have debt like I have. In addition to being a student and a parent, I'm a worker that experienced the unfunded system that we live in firsthand. It seems that no matter how hard I work to support my children for a better life, the system is not always on our side for our Black and brown students and families. The cost of college has shifted from the state to students and families, which is why we have student loan debt. Since my son Linnell is in first year college student, I have to have conversation with him about cost of college because he is first year and he doesn't have student loans debt like I have. But the cost of college is going up along with tuition. He has to pay for things like fees and health insurance. His financial aid doesn't cover those costs, and he has to pay for them out of pocket. As a parent, I see this problem on just affecting me. This is affecting my son, who is in college, and my daughter, who hopes to go to college. We need to create a Boston student debt report so they can figure out who in Boston is more affected by student loan debt and create policy and support the most affected. We need justice in our higher ed. I apologize. We need justice.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you so much for your heartfelt and honest testimony. This is the reality that we're all facing, and it's important for us to create space for people to be heard. And more importantly, it's what we do with what we hear and how we're going to move the work forward. So thank you for that. I am wondering if Eddie Fisher, if you're still with us. I see you on the gallery, but I'm not sure if you are still with us. So let me see if I need to upgrade you. I'm going to unmute your audio. Only you could do that. Okay. Eddie Fisher, going once. If anyone knows Eddie Glaudio in particular, can you send him a text message and ask him to, you don't know, okay. So Eddie, I know you signed up for public testimony. We wanted to give you the opportunity to speak. We'll hold on for another few seconds. And I want to be super mindful that, our hearing was slated till 7. I don't want to hear anyone hostage. I don't think it would be fair. And you probably won't come back if we do. So I'd like to give an opportunity. I believe that's all that we have for public testimony this evening. I'd like to thank members of the public and to the panelists for their testimony. And before we close this hearing, just wanted to know if anyone had any closing remarks that they'd like to share. I'm going to go to the gallery view. If you could just utilize your blue hand. If anyone, oh, I see you. Okay. I'm very big on letting everyone speak, y'all. Okay, so I don't see any blue hands. Oh, I do, I see one. Okay, my sister Kim. All right, Councilor Janey.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank you again for your partnership on this hearing order and for your leadership chairing this hearing. I wanted to thank Zero Debt Massachusetts. I want to thank all of the panelists. I want us to, as a next step, I hope that we can gather, get those data set questions together and submit those and have more conversation with the administration here in Boston to move this forward. So I just wanted to thank everyone for your advocacy, your leadership, and your work on this on a day-to-day, and let's continue so that we can get this study. You know, my biggest fear is that I think we can all predict what a study by zip code and by neighborhood and by race and ethnicity is going to tell us. And so what I hope we build into that is what are we going to do about the results when we see the results. So anyway, thank you again. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Councilor Janey. I echo those same points. I think that for me, we already know what we know. I mean, I think the study is just going to affirm what we already know, and I appreciate the process of which we have to go through to just get work done, but just trust that as a council, and I'll speak for myself as the chair of workforce development, this is something that is near and dear to me, and we're partners in this and looking forward to joining you alongside those who are already in the front lines. A big shout out to Claudio Martinez for Zero Debt Massachusetts and your entire cohort of advocates out there who every day I see so visible out in the community championing this work. And to our panelists, thank you so much. It's great to see the president of Roxbury Community College here in this space. Like, this is what it looks like when everybody comes to the table. The chancellor from UMass Boston, Commissioner Santiago, just Claudia, Vanessa Snow, Kate. This is what it looks like when we all come to the table to have one conversation. And so really looking forward to what happens next. I am going to, in the interest of making sure that we end in the way that we should, I don't have an official gavel, but I'm going to gavel us out of this hearing. Thank you so much. We will be following up with next steps. Have a beautiful night. Thank you so much for joining us. Muchas gracias a todos. Buenas noches. Un besote. Adiós. Okay.